Meals on Wheels is probably one of the most well-known programs that SMAA offers. Tell me some other ways that you support your community. I'd like to welcome our listeners to the Boulos Beat podcast. I'm Jessica Estes, guest hosting for Greg Boulos. The Boulos Company is Northern New England's largest commercial real estate services firm, with offices in Portland, Maine, as well as Manchester and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We've been selling and leasing real estate in Maine and New Hampshire since 1975. This podcast is designed to provide insight into Maine's business movers and shakers. And speaking of business leaders, I'd like to welcome Megan Walton to the Boulos Beat. Megan is the CEO at Southern Maine Agency on Aging, an organization that has served older and disabled adults in York and Cumberland counties for 50 years. Megan moved to Maine 3.5 years ago after living in Seattle for 11 years. In Seattle, Walton worked for AMARA, a nonprofit that supports children and families experiencing foster care. Walton began her tenure at AMARA in 2009 as development associate, eventually working her way up to chief operating officer while attending an MBA program on nights and weekends. She was part of a dedicated team that grew the organization from a 20-person staff with $1 million budget to a 75-person staff with a $5 million budget over a 10-year period. Megan's originally from the Boston area. She holds a BA from Middlebury College and an MBA from the Albers School of Business at Seattle University. She currently serves on the nonprofit boards of 75 State Street and In and Spirit, and co-chairs the Maine Power and Aging Committee. During her free time, and I'm not sure how she has any at this point, but she likes to stay active, write music, and support other female leaders as they advance in their careers. Megan and her husband live in Falmouth with their 3 children. Welcome, Megan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jess. I'm so excited to be here. This is really quite exciting.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you here. And I think we were just talking before this started about how I feel like I know you pretty well, but it's good to get to know a little bit more about who you are and your history. In fact, I learned a couple things about you just reading your bio just now. And there's an organization that I'm not familiar with that you're on the board of called In and Spirit. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Let's just dive right in.
Yes.
So thanks for asking that question about In and Spirit. So it's actually a big part of my story because when I was really young, our family ended up losing my cousin in a random act of violence. And she was in her early 20s and she was kind of just starting her career and her independent life. And we actually lost Anne on my birthday when I was, again, really, really young. And because of that, I have always kind of felt this strong desire or strong push to like really make the most out of every minute and every day. Because I think we just never know how long we're going to have here on the planet. And I've just always felt connected to Anne's spirit. And so when you asked about that, it really brought up a lot of those memories for me. And what is amazing is that my aunt and uncle and my family have really turned that into that tragedy into an opportunity. And In and Spirit is a community-led foundation, nonprofit board that supports programs that help to prevent violence in our communities. So as you can tell, there's always just kind of been this strong pull to help humans and to make connections with others in the community. So yeah, it's an important part of my story.
Yeah, definitely something that drives you. What a story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you have been in Maine since 2019.
I have.
Yeah, and shortly after moving to Maine, you decided to join the Southern Maine Agency on Aging, which I think you call it SMAA. Is that correct?
Yeah, great question.
Okay.
We are the Southern Maine Agency on Aging, and many people know us as SMAA. It's our 50th anniversary year, so we are trying on SMAA whenever possible.
All
but
right.
hey, I won't.
I can go SMAA.
Yes,
absolutely.
the agency. Yeah.
So, what was it about the opportunity at SMAA that interested you?
Yeah, definitely. So, I as you shared in my bio, I was on the West Coast for a while, and my husband is originally from Oregon. So we had a lot of connections there and had built this wonderful life. And I always felt a strong pull to Maine. I grew up coming here in the summers. I went to a summer camp on Sebago Lake, and I just always felt like Maine was home. And so when it was time to make a decision about, are we going to raise our kids on the West Coast or East Coast, we made the decision to move to Portland, Maine. And neither of us had a job at that point. We didn't have a house or anything lined up. It was a definite leap of faith. But really quickly, I just started to network with individuals locally, and I learned about the Southern Maine Agency on Aging. And I said to the recruiter who was working on that search, just so you know, I don't have any experience in aging or the aging field. I've been working with kids and families. But the more that I learned about the agency, the more I really leaned in. There's a really strong commitment from volunteers and staff. There's a strong history, as you just alluded to. And when I share that I work at the agency, there's a lot of strong community response, usually to the positive. So it's just been a great organization to be a part of.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story. What a leap. You're right. Leap of faith for sure.
Yeah.
So you shared earlier that this is SMAA's 50th year in Maine. What are you doing as an organization to celebrate that?
Yeah, great question. Well, we're having fun community conversations like this one to start. So it's been great to revisit with some of our corporate sponsors like Boulos, because we couldn't do this work alone. And so we've had some great conversations with local community leaders. We're hoping to engage the governor's office this year. And we have a big 50th anniversary luncheon scheduled in September, on September 21st. So that will be a great chance to bring everyone back together. But it's a moment to celebrate the mission, but also really to let people know about the great needs that are out in our community.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned before that when you talked to the recruiter about this opportunity, you said, I don't have experience with an aging population, but how did your previous role prepare you for this one?
Yeah, great question. So I really had a wonderful opportunity in Seattle because I got to be part of a small nonprofit that grew pretty dramatically over the years. And what was amazing is that I got to grow with that organization. And I'm sure, similar to you, so much of the success of that organization is really due to great mentors and also an amazing team that I was a part of for many years. And I worked in everything from development and fundraising to running our programs, to launching our new volunteer program, to putting together some 24/7 shelters that had never been done in our area. So my responsibilities there really ran the gamut, which means that, I was just so thrilled to be able to bring that skill set and that experience, but also a lot of humility to the work at our agency here in Maine.
Yeah. And so you really know the ins and outs of really how the agency operates up and down.
Exactly. And sometimes my curiosity can, drive members of my team crazy, right? But I really want to understand and know how things work and why we do things a certain way, and how does that ultimately drive the results that we want to see.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be a key part of your leadership there.
Yes.
So since I've known you, I know you've expanded your family a little bit. You and your husband, Sean, have 3 children. And I am just curious how you manage it all between being the head of an organization such as you are and, having time for family and everything else. How do you do that?
Oh my goodness. Well, we could have a whole separate podcast on just this. No, it's a great question. I'm sure that you ask a lot of our peers. And for me, I think, again, I just really want to live out my values. And for me, commitment to community has always been really important, which has driven me into this role. And then I really believe I'm the best mom when my cup is filled. And so every day, every week, it's really reprioritizing, like, how can I take care of my needs, desires, dreams, goals, so that I can really be there for the kids.
Yeah,
at the end of the
absolutely.
day.
Yeah, that's a good perspective.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about SMAA's mission.
Yes. So Southern Maine Agency on Aging has been serving older adults, adults with disabilities, and their caregivers for 50 years. And our belief is really that there's a just and equitable world when it comes to aging. And that means really including older members of our society as neighbors, as friends, as connections. I think what's really special about Maine is I think there is a value that elders and older adults really matter here. We see that in terms of the dozens of volunteers who came forward in the pandemic because they wanted to do more to help. We see that in the way that community partners like Boulos continue to support our work. We're just really driven by how do we make sure people in our community are less lonely and are connected to individuals or community supports.
Sure. And so how many people are employed by your organization? And also curious you mentioned your volunteers. How many volunteers do you have?
Yes. So right now we have a little over 400 active volunteers with the agency, which is pretty incredible.
That's great.
Yep. And we have a 50-person staff. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's a good ratio.
It is a good ratio.
A lot of volunteer power there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so much teaming that happens between our volunteers and staff.
Sure.
They really do work side by side. And I think there's equal just trust and confidence on both sides.
That's great.
Yeah.
So what is the most rewarding part of your job?
Oh, such a good question. It is very rewarding that so many of our team members, I think, have really just stepped up and taken on new roles and responsibilities, whether it's on our accounting team or external partnerships team or our programs. People have really stepped up, and I think the pandemic showed us what we were capable of.
Yeah.
And so that brings a lot of reward. And ultimately, I feel like we're all here because we want older adults in our community to be healthier and more connected and less lonely. And I think anytime you hear a story or an anecdote about somebody who has been supported, it just drives us to do more.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the pandemic, so I did want to ask that question.
Yeah.
The population that your organization serves is certainly one of the most acutely impacted by the pandemic. So I'm curious how you, and if my math is right, you were fairly new in your role.
6 months into the role. Yep. Yep.
And so probably still figuring it out. And then this pandemic hit. So tell me a little bit, if you could, about how the organization shifted and changed the ways that it meets the needs of that population.
Yeah, great question. So immediately when the pandemic hit, we knew that for a lot of our clients and a lot of community members, we were kind of going to be that only lifeline that they had, because many of our clients don't have family members who live nearby or don't have a sense of community just because they are homebound. I think one of the greatest accomplishments of our team was that within a matter of weeks, we had actually doubled our Meals on Wheels production and deliveries. So right away, we saw just a dramatic increase in the need for help with food security. And of course, as soon as you are able to provide something like that to an individual, you soon learn, this person could also use a phone call a couple of times a week from a volunteer just to check in and see how they're doing. And so the team was able to really bolster our Phone Pals program, which reaches, again, Meals on Wheels clients who need that additional support. It was really, again, just rapid response and experimenting and trying different things. But again, I think it showed us what we were capable of. And one of the most satisfying projects for us as an agency was as soon as the vaccination came out in early 2021, we saw that there were a lot of older adults who could not get online to make an appointment, and yet they so desperately wanted and needed that vaccination. And so we had a group of 12 volunteers and some staff members who just took those calls from individuals who needed appointments, and then we would call them back as soon as a slot opened up. And in partnership with Northern Light, we were able to host so many different clinics across Western York County and Portland, Western Cumberland County, like just so many opportunities to bring the community together for something that really mattered.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I think Meals on Wheels is probably one of the most well-known programs that SMAA offers. Tell me some other ways that you support your community, your population.
Yeah, definitely. So one piece of feedback I hear all the time is, I had no idea how much Southern Maine Agency on Aging does. So you're right, there's a plethora of programs. And I think if there's one thing we want your listeners to know, it's that we hope that you'll call us if you have a question about aging or an aging relative or somebody who lives in your community who really needs extra support. Because when someone calls us maybe initially about one concern, we can quickly connect them to other resources available, whether in-house at our agency or elsewhere. So in addition to addressing food security, we also address financial security by offering what's called our Money Minders program, which helps people who are having trouble balancing their checkbook or opening their mail or keeping up with things. So we want to make sure that they're supported. Our Medicare counseling program is also pretty well known because when people turn 65, there's a lot to navigate in terms of signing up for that. And often we have clients who will review their Medicare once a year and can save hundreds, if not thousands of dollars each year just by signing up for a different program available.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. That's interesting. So that is something that really anybody 65 or older could take advantage of.
Absolutely. And then we have a bunch of age well classes, whether that's Tai Chi or yoga or balance classes. We regularly offer that kind of wellness class for people over the age of 60. And then we have so many resources available for caregivers. And I know caregiving was a part of your journey as well, because caregivers need just as much support as our clients do. Caregiving can be exhausting, and we want to make sure that they feel supported, that they have regular trainings or support groups to be a part of. And then there's also a lot of benefits available right now at the state and federal level for caregivers and older adults.
So great. That's great. So how can people who are listening or watching support SMAA and the population you serve in general? What can regular people do to be a support to your...
Oh, great question. There's so many ways that people can support our agency's work. Just appreciate that you're asking and having this conversation today. Our website is smaaa.org, and that lists all of our resources and benefits and information. People can help by becoming a volunteer. So I mentioned how important volunteers are. And there's so many different volunteer opportunities available at our agency and also in the local community that we can get people connected to. So we encourage people to reach out about that. We rely on foundations, corporations, individuals, towns to really support our work and help bolster the work that we do. And so we have a giving page on that website. And then I think the other thing is to really be just cognizant of people in your own local community who could maybe use some additional support. I hear so many examples of, I noticed that my neighbor was having trouble preparing meals, and so that's why I got her connected to Meals on Wheels. Or my son has just started shoveling Mr. Smith's driveway down the street. Like, so much of this is about how do we care for our community's neighbors. And just looking up from our own lives to see who else might need
what's around us,
and
for sure. That's interesting. I wanted to ask, so if somebody is listening or watching who leads an organization that does a day of service or something with their employees, is that something that they could parlay into assisting?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. And we
Okay.
do work with numerous businesses who like to have that kind of exposure to our programs. And
Good.
yeah,
Okay.
there's so many opportunities there.
All right.
Yeah.
So go to the website and feel free to organize your day of service with Megan and her team. So I found that one of the things about running a business is that it's really important to stay engaged and keep learning and try to stay on top of trends and just continue to gain more knowledge wherever you can. So I'm curious, are there any podcasts that you listen to regularly or books, or is there anything you do to keep active in that way?
Yes, such a good question. And again, we could probably do a whole separate episode on just this because I'm definitely a personal development leadership junkie, right? I just eat that stuff up. Right now, I really love James Clear, Atomic Habits. And just 5 minutes a day and making time for what's most important to you. I listen to Entre Leadership, which has a little bit of a religious bent at times, but I think there's some really good core principles there. I love the podcast Emotionally Uncomfortable, especially for women who are also maybe in a mothering capacity. And I also just had the opportunity to go through a year-long fellowship with the Gorman Foundation locally.
Nice. Yeah.
And so we did a lot of work through results-based accountability, which was fascinating. And then we actually ended up doing Myers-Briggs again. And I will tell you, I'm such a believer in that.
Yeah.
Stuff. It's so good for your team.
It really
right?
is.
Where do we all land, right?
Yeah.
No matter what that is.
Yeah.
So I could go on and on, but I think there's so many good things out there that I just want to pay attention to. And I'm also a big believer in brain science and how we really have to change our thinking in order to achieve new results.
In order to grow.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely check out a couple of those.
Yes.
And
now we'll
share.
add the Boulos Beat to the list as well. We've had quite the lineup.
So you just mentioned brain science and changing your thinking. And so I'm curious about any philosophies that you believe in or practices by which you live your life or do your work. Any kind of guiding principles there for you?
Wow, another big question. I love it. I think especially for women, there's so many messages that we receive, some of them conscious, many of them unconscious throughout the years. And so I really like to encourage women to take radical self-responsibility for your own life, your own goals, your own desires. You have to honor those first. And someone recently said to me that self-care is out and self-caring as a verb is in, because it's really about how do you make it a regular practice. So I'm a big believer of getting quiet, right? Listening to your inner voice, your gut, right? If something does feel off, let's look at the facts and look at the evidence. Why is that? So meditation, exercise, anything to get you back in the zone.
So you can be there for your people.
So you can be there for the team, for your family. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I like that a lot.
It's a practice.
Yes, it is. It certainly is. So what are your goals for your organization over the next 5 or 10 years, assuming you have some? Curious what you're working toward now.
Yeah, great question. Our goal is really that older people in their community are connected, whether that's connected to individuals, connected to a local group or something that they're involved with, connected to an agency like ours. We want to end loneliness and social isolation for older adults. There are way too many individuals right now who are suffering just because they don't have that regular interaction with another person. And so any strategies that bring us closer to that goal is really critical. And I would say we also have a wonderful adult day program at our agency, and you have been a critical partner in helping us make our space what it is today. And that program is incredibly successful. And I think it's because, one, it's needed. There are many individuals who have a loved one with dementia, and they just need an adult day program during the day so they can get to work or go to the grocery store and not worry about mom. And we would like to bring that program to many more communities in Southern Maine. So we have a desire to launch community hubs in the coming years to ensure that more local communities have an adult day program at their fingertips, that they can get connected with a social worker from Southern Maine Agency on Aging, and that we can just start to meet more needs in the community. Yeah.
I think that's great. So the current program is in Biddeford, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Our current program's in Biddeford. And then we have 8 different Meals on Wheels or nutrition sites throughout our 2 counties.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So if there's one thing I want your listeners to know, it is that Maine is the oldest state in the nation. And Cumberland and York counties in particular have some of the highest population rates for the 60 plus population. And that means that we're really a great place to experiment and try and do things differently in order to get the needs of older individuals met. I love any kind of pilot program that might help people, again, be more connected, less lonely, and really building, again, up a support system for older individuals that puts their needs first.
Yeah. Well, Megan, I will say as a state, as a community, we are very lucky to have you. I'm so glad that you consider Maine home and that you came here to build your life. And I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I feel the same way about you. And am so glad that we serendipitously did get connected years ago.
Yeah.
Because you were such a key partner in our real estate journey as an organization as well. So
my pleasure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You can learn more about Megan and the Southern Maine Agency on Aging at the company's website, which is smaa.org, and on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Southern Maine Agency on Aging. And if you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at www.boulos.com. You can also find us at the Boulos Company on Facebook and LinkedIn, and at the Boulos Co. on Instagram and Twitter.